always a great treat. We had Gene come to our chamber a number of years ago, and he's quite the draw. Always enjoy hearing his program. Our next speaker, Don Laux. He is the County Commissioner, Precinct 3 in Cedar Creek, Red Rock, Stony Point, elected in 2000. And we had our congressman already mention about our firefighters and what they've done. And Don Laux is also a volunteer fire. Let me tell you, back years ago, when my father lived down in Rocheron back in the 70s, I decided I wanted to be a volunteer fireman. I went to the training, went everything. We went to a fire, and I decided that's just not for me. I'm not the hero. They had quite the fire, and it scared the bejeebers out of me. We have firefighters that we're recognizing now for their service, and this gentleman here is, by all measurements, a hero. We look upon, many people use the word hero, they throw it around like Pee Wee League trophies for participation. We call baseball players heroes. Folks, ladies and gentlemen, you folks who have served in our armed forces and who volunteer and work with fire departments, you're my hero. Don as well has worked as an instructor and a test pilot. He flew F-111s. Am I saying that? 111s? Jet fighters. He worked in an operation and training deployments to Alaska, Korea, Australia, Turkey, Italy, Germany, and Spain. His decorations include Air Force Meritorious Service Medal, Air Force Commendation Medal, Air Force Outstanding Unit Award, Combat Readiness, National Defense Service Medal, Air Force Expert Worksman Ribbon, Air Force Training Ribbon, Texas State Guard Awards, Commanding General Individuals Award, Meritorious, I don't know, I have that vulnerable, I have problems with this word, Service Award, and the Humanitarian Service Award. We have people that serve us, folks, and this is truly one of our more outstanding speakers that we're having here today. He's a true hero, and I'd like for you all, please put your hands together for Don Laux.
From Williamson County?
You broke it.
Cedar type something.
Cedar, yeah.
I usually break these things. I'll let you do
The website just to this?
It'll have to. That's good. That'll work. Thank you, sir. Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God.
Amen.
So said Thomas Jefferson. In my lifetime, I have never thought those words were more applicable than they are today. We see grinning politicians telling us what they think is best for us. The vice president instructs us that the best way to protect ourselves from a burglar is to go outside our house and shoot both rounds from a double-barrel shotgun into the air, thus unloading it, to scare him off. What does one have then? An empty gun. This from a man who has round-the-clock Secret Service protection by men who have many more than 2 rounds in their guns. What hypocrisy. What gall. Joe Biden has been following up his stupid, arrogant blathering with even more outrageous statements that are too lengthy to repeat here. Joe Biden and those like him are dangers to the Constitution and to our freedoms. These people wield great power, and as such must be held in check. Remember the words of George Washington. Government is not reason. It is not eloquence. It is force. Like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. Joe Biden is the face of those with power, those who would be our masters. They are not reason. They are not eloquent, but they are, unfortunately, force. And they are exerting that force in a way that has never been experienced before. But thanks very much, Mr. Vice President, for your advice. However, I prefer to use a weapon that has at least 30 rounds in it to protect my family and my property and my country. I served 35 years in military service, 22 in the U.S. Air Force and 13 in the Texas State Guard. I am ashamed to say this, but I did not become politically aware and active until I returned from overseas to retire at Burleson Air Force Base. When I came back stateside, I sensed something was wrong with our country. It was 1992, and the Democrats were pushing gun control, and Bill Clinton was running for president. I realized that what they were saying about our Second Amendment rights did not make sense. After all, what really was wrong about owning an AR-15? I did not fully understand it. Mr. Paul Velty, myself, and others founded Peaceable Texans for Firearms Rights and proceeded to hold rallies in Texas and lobby the legislature. In 1994, I had the privilege of addressing the National Rally for Firearms Rights in Washington, D.C. It was a formative, life-changing moment for me. As I stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and gave my speech, gazed down at the Mall and the Washington Monument and the Capitol beyond, I realized that there was much more than the Second Amendment at stake. The very existence of our nation as it was founded was being threatened. We had a reprieve of sorts. The Democratic Congress passed the so-called assault weapon ban in September of 1994. The resultant backlash swept them out of power in the U.S. House 2 months later in November. The ban expired in 2004, and no one has had the temerity to try to reinstate it. Until now. The enemies of freedom now see an opportunity to use both recent tragedies and a public ignorance to try it again. Those enemies of our rights, all of our rights, not just the Second Amendment, are afraid that the American people may soon reawaken and realize what has been happening over the last 100 years. How many of you know how horrible a year 1913 was? Ooh. Some of you do. Woodrow Wilson, a progressive Democrat, was president with a compliant Congress. 3 things happened that year that forever changed the course of American government. First, the Federal Reserve was created. Just so you know, it's not federal and it's not a reserve. It is a lie perpetrated on the American people in order to control the currency and tax the people, us, through inflation. Second, the 16th Amendment was passed creating the federal income tax. Lincoln tried to create an income tax during the Civil War, but it was struck down as being unconstitutional. The amendment fixed that pesky little problem. And by the way, it was sold to the American people as being only a 1% tax on the very wealthy. We know the monster it has become. Third, the 17th Amendment was passed, which changed the way U.S. senators are selected. And this is important to understand. Prior to the amendment, senators were appointed by their respective state legislatures as ambassadors to the federal government. But the propaganda mill of the day portrayed the Senate as being too obstructive and stodgy. Well, of course, they were protecting their individual states' rights. It prevented the liberal progressives in the government from getting things done. The problem here is that it is an aim of socialism to make all elections popular vote. That way, those who can influence public opinion, and we know who those are today, and sway ignorant voters will have much, much more power. Does this situation sound applicable to what's going on in the news media today? The original Constitution allowed only one federal office to be elected by popular vote, the U.S. House of Representatives. The founders understood how power could be subverted and built-in safeguards that have subsequently been whittled away. Do you know what the last vestige of states' rights is that remains in the Constitution? It is under fire by the leftists. It is maligned almost every presidential election by the loser. It is the Electoral College. Without the protection of the Electoral College that it affords to the less populous states, there is no reason for the states to any longer exist. There would be no more protection for Wyoming or Alaska, and America would be ruled by the left and right coasts. God help us. It is up to us to spread the word about these things, to educate, demonstrate, and argue for the case of freedom. One of the arguments we hear in the Second Amendment debate is this: the founding fathers used black powder muskets and never envisioned assault rifles. Did they not envision modern weapons? Perhaps they did. The reason I say this is that our founders knew that what we now regrettably do not know. They had a thorough knowledge of history. They knew the progression of weaponry up to their time. They saw the development of military weapons, and they realized that there would always be a progression and development as one side sought an advantage over another. They saw the spear countered by the sword and shield. They saw armored soldiers on horseback countered by infantry carrying pikes. They saw artillery increase in its lethality. During the Revolutionary War, they saw the first rifled long guns. Breech-loading firearms were only decades away. But the most important thing they knew was the same thing they incorporated into our Constitution. It was the most important thing. It was the balance of power. It doesn't matter what the weaponry is, be it an AR-15, a phaser, or a lightsaber. The important factor is that the American people should have the same type of personal weapons as do the government. As long as we, the people, have the ability to defend ourselves from tyrants, the tyrants will try to take that power away from us. As long as we are self-sufficient, the tyrants will try to make us dependent. As long as we know freedom, the tyrants will try to take that knowledge away from us. As long as we know God, the tyrants will try to make us strangers to Him. For the sake of our blessed nation, for the sake of freedom everywhere, we must not let these things happen. Ronald Reagan said the following: freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We don't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. Or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like in the United States, where men were free. God bless you, lovers of freedom. God bless this great